What's over your right shoulder? It looks like you have like an alien like weapon, like a futuristic alien. No, behind.
This?
No, back further past that on the left. No, I mean on your right. It looks like a. Doesn't it looks like
Oh, you
metallic?
mean the fan? The
Yeah. Oh,
fan.
it's a fan.
It's a fucking fan, Steve.
I don't know. I was like, does he have a futuristic weapon? I'm always interested. You know what I mean? Who
That's
knows?
my wife, asshole.
That is I don't think there is any better way to kick off this interview than with that sentiment.
Perfect.
I'm gonna do a quick little intro. That could be our cold open. So there you go. What's going on, Geek Vibes Nation? This is senior critic Larry Freed here with a very special interview for you fine folks. I'm talking to the director and subject behind a very just wonderful and essential documentary that had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival, and it will be coming to the New York institution that is the Film Forum on January 3rd. I am talking to Steve Pink and Adam Kinzinger of The Last Republican. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you guys doing?
Larry, thanks for having us. Appreciate it. I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So, first of all, before we even talk about the documentary itself, I want to know how you guys are feeling about the film in this very moment, because this is the kind of film where from one day to the next, the sort of essential nature of it sort of grows or changes in some way. I feel like an audience who sees this, who saw this, in October, will have a very different experience than the audience who sees it now in January. Are the feelings somewhat bittersweet, or are you guys? And we'll start with Steve, with you. Or do you feel a strange sense that this documentary has become something beyond what you originally expected it to, or do you think that the piece is now even more vital?
Well, certainly, I think people will view it in a different context now. I'm not sure what context that is, but the things that I think are important about the story and important about the documentary remain true, if not truer than ever, frankly. And so it has. I think the document has gained a certain amount of urgency because it's a story about Adam and his stand against, everything that happened in the aftermath of Jan 6, and standing up against his party and what that means, and the courage to do that. And then the movie kind of becomes this profile, or this something I can't speak, so you'll get to edit this. The movie kind of became this story about the need for civil discourse between us. Like there's obviously a comedic frame and banter that happens between Adam and I think that our ability to try and find our way to agreeing with each other as Americans is also more important than ever.
And Larry, I'll say, look, I've watched this when it premiered at TIFF prior to the election, and I had a fully different feeling about what was going to happen in November. And then I actually watched it again about a week ago at a screening, and it hits differently. It really does. And it's kind of like I can feel my optimism that I felt, for instance, watching this in October or September is very different than what it feels like today. But I also think in that process, I recognize that this thing has become probably doubly more important than it was in September or October. Because one of the things, look, even for me, one of the things that this election did was it helped me to realize, like, as Americans, we're not talking to each other. And I don't think it's just America. I think it's frankly every democracy around the world is struggling with this right now. We're not talking to each other. We don't understand each other. And this is a film where we are talking to each other and we're understanding each other. My story is actually, I think, kind of secondary to what for me is the most important thing, which is this interaction between Steve and I, which we did not even set out to create. I mean, Steve didn't set that out to be what the film was. It just naturally became that. So I think it's way more important now, and I'm glad, frankly, that it's here being discussed at this moment.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what either of you set out to make, because I'm still a little bit. I've listened to some interviews with you guys. You've talked about the film, but I'm still a little bit confused as to what the actual origins of this piece are. Because Steve, you talk about it in the film. You're a comedy director. Most people know you from Hot Tub Time Machine, and you found yourself directing this political documentary, which you have explicitly stated multiple times you never wanted to do. So, which, by the way, that's how the best films are made, in my humble opinion.
Mhm.
But talk to me about how this even came across, your purview. What were the very origins of you directing this project?
Well, some colleagues of mine and me started a documentary film company. I was actually the only fiction filmmaker in the bunch. The rest of my colleagues are like renowned documentary filmmakers. And so, from a just pure storytelling perspective, I was, always interested in making a documentary and telling a political subject. And so being in comedy, actually, I wanted to make a political drama. I love the political thriller dramas in the 1970s. And you see the way we shot it, it has this very kind of cinematic feel, because I was going into making an important story about a crucial, political moment in Adam's life. And we're walking through the parking lot, and I'm filming him go up to his apartment with his wife Sophia one day, and he turns to me and he goes, "Hey, by the way, I just want to let you know I loved Hot Tub Time Machine." And in that moment, like, my relationship changed with him, because I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be an important, political documentary filmmaker. And he just said something that I was totally surprised by, because I was like, I wouldn't even imagine you saw my movies, and I'm not making a comedy. This is supposed to be serious. Stop talking about hot tub. And so what that did was create like a common ground that changed our relationship. I was like, oh, well, if you like that movie, I have a sense of like the kind of comedy you like or what makes you laugh. And from then, like, so the movie kind of shifted in that moment and started to become about something else. We didn't really realize how much we would use of our comedic banter in the movie while we were shooting it, because so much was going on and there was so much stress that was, around Sophia and Adam, particularly when it came to the death threats leading up and beyond and through Jan 6. But the kind of comedic relationship that we developed, we certainly saw in the editing room, and then became, what the film was as much about as anything.
Well, look, and I knew, so I knew Kevin Morris, who was part of this, and hadn't met Steve Pink yet. And Kevin had basically brought everybody together to start this collective, this documentary group. And of course, that was right at the moment that everything was bad or tough, that we knew everything was going to be historic. Let's put it that way. And so I'd been approached by a bunch of documentary folks that wanted to do like, what's the horse race of, can Adam win re-election? And I knew I wasn't going to run for re-election at that point. And then they came to me and said, look, we want to do this documentary. I'm like, no, because whatever. And it's like, but they expressed to me that they were more interested in the human element of it. And for me, that was intriguing, because I think there is not enough understanding of what public figures go through behind the scenes, what that human element is. And I also knew this was going to be an important piece to show my kid someday, to explain what this time was like that he was frankly part of, but he won't remember. So for me, that was the genesis of it, where I'm like, yeah, okay, I don't want to do it, and I hate having cameras follow me, and I really did the whole time, but I recognize the importance of it, and they did a good job of spelling that out, and I think we were right.
Steve, you talk about these sort of political thrillers of the 60s and 70s. I find it fascinating that at the Philadelphia Film Festival, which is where I got to see this film,
Oh.
I saw this film one day, and then the next day we saw maybe the most color averse 35 millimeter print of All the President's Men in a totally separate screening. And it feels like there's like a simpatico thing going on there. I'm curious, Steve, like, if we could just take a moment to talk about those films. Or do you have a few that you maybe go back to or that you like? And Adam, I don't know how deep back your cinephile nature goes, but are there any political thrillers that you love or revisit during this time?
Well, I mean, All the President's Men is the staple, right? That's the foundational kind of cornerstone movie for me, because it's funny.
Yeah.
And it's also has a subject. Like, I like, Parallax View, the more paranoid one. I like, I love JFK from the 90s, which also has some like really funny moments in it, weirdly. Like, it's a kind of paranoid political thriller. But John Candy is hilarious in that movie. And so I tend to like the political dramas that were kind of in force as a political drama, but had moments where you saw people's humanity in ways that made you laugh. So because I think they told bigger and fuller stories. Of course, I love The Conversation because of the twist. Right? It's one of the most extraordinary twists in any movie, and the way it was shot was so incredible. And so I think we even used some of the temp music from The Conversation, and maybe the version you saw.
Oh, wow.
not sure if Philadelphia had the final mix or the festival mix, but in any case, we did use a lot of that to drive some of the narrative when we were making the movie.
So here's an interesting thing for me. This is how deep my film knowledge is. I actually think Veep, which is a show, obviously, is the most realistic about Washington. So that's the funny thing.
You're not alone. You're not
Yeah,
alone.
I know.
A lot
I
of
know.
people agree with you.
The two movies I love the most, because I think it actually brings one of them, frankly, kind of shows, there's this impression we always have of like, okay, Winston Churchill for 15 years was out in the cold as he was, arguing against the Nazis. But we always see like those moments as heroic. We look back and like Winston Churchill knew what the right thing was. And I now understand I'm not Winston Churchill. I'm not saying this, but I understand what it's like to stand alone and how lonely and hard that really is and how easy it is to walk away from that because it's difficult. So I look back at Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which I think is just an old school, this is what it's supposed to be like. And then I also think of Bulworth, because to me, the thing I can relate to on Bulworth is there's that moment where he's like, screw it, I'm just going to do what I want to do, right? And I think he comes out with like the rap outfit on or whatever. And I felt like that happened to me. There was a moment at which I was just like, you know what? I'm done playing the game. I'm done pretending. Here's the truth. So, yeah, I haven't thought too much about it, but I'd say those two are the best for me.
Those are great. In fact, Eddie Murphy was kind of raw. Or no, that I was thinking, oh, that's not Bulworth. That's
Bowfinger. You
that's
think of Bowfinger?
that's Bowfinger. But I'm still outraged. I'm still certainly triggered by this that he didn't win an Academy Award for that the performance, which is not a political movie. But since we're talking about it, if anyone's not seen Bowfinger, you have to watch Eddie Murphy because he plays obviously multiple roles and he deserved an Oscar.
A genius. Adam, I tip my cap to you, sir. Those are two fantastic picks.
Thank you.
But I want to go back to something you said before. Obviously you've had cameras on you for a while as a politician. You're used to having that presence, but to allow them into your personal life in a much more absorbing way, I'm sure was something that you gave a lot of thought. I'm curious for you what that experience was like, and most specifically about, what it takes for a director like Steve Pink to establish trust with you to make it so that he can explore all of these things that, at least in how the film portrays it, in a rather unfiltered way.
Look, I will say that. So first off, what was it like? I didn't love it. I got to appreciate it more. But like as a politician, it's funny to say it, but I don't like politicians because I always think they're fake, which I'm kind of the same problem that I'm trying to like get people to understand is not the case. But when I see people with cameras following them around, the thing I think about is that's not a genuine person. That's somebody that's doing this for the visuals. So I was concerned about that, especially during such an important time. I didn't want people to say Adam's doing this because he's going to be on TV or in a movie or whatever. And, but eventually, you came to realize like, okay, this is how it's done. This is how you have a rich kind of deep documentary is a deep film is you have to have big cameras. You can't just have a guy with a camcorder. And Steve and I, look, I don't know if there was a moment at which I went to, I can trust Steve, because in fact, you see at the very beginning of the film, Sophia's even saying, look, we're putting a lot of power in you and you could really screw us over. And we felt that way. We felt like they could do this. But I also recognize the risk. The risk is, yes, you're putting trust in them. But I recognize that Steve was a good man, even though we disagreed on things. Like I actually think, by the way, picking a friend based on politics is the stupidest reason to pick a friend, personally. But I recognize that we had a good rapport. I recognize that he wasn't out to make me look bad. But the difference, too, is you're going to see a different view of me. Like, I'm dropping F-bombs. I'm dipping tobacco. I'm doing all that stuff that I don't do on CNN, right? So you have this different view of me, and I'm even bringing you into my friggin' friendships, which is hard to do. And I'm glad I did it. But yeah, it was tough. It's an adjustment for sure.
Steve, break down for me a little bit about this production. I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff. I want to know, how long was the production? How many hours of footage did you guys get? And talk to me about the editing process. How much was the edit changing on the day-to-day when you were going back to it?
So we filmed around, I think, about 18 months off and on. It was very like our first day of filming was the day Adam found out officially that the Democrats had redistricted him and smashed him into a district with a MAGA Republican, right? Which was sealing his fate, which was, of course, ironic because it was Nancy Pelosi who put him on the Jan 6 committee. I was like, couldn't she have made a call, to the Illinois Democrats and say, leave this guy in a seat, whether he wanted it or not? I don't know. I just found that ironic. I was going to, that's kind of on our side. And then it went all the way through Jan 6, right? And through the Jan 6 hearings, and then all the way to Adam's last day in Congress, where essentially a ton happened. Like in the space of like 2 days, it was the criminal referral in the Jan 6 committee, Adam's last speech on the floor, and then him literally just leaving town for the last time as a lawmaker. So that was, some pretty intense, stuff going on. Although his car didn't start, which you'll see in the documentary, which is hilarious. So he goes through some of the most momentous things anyone could go through as a lawmaker. Then he goes down to leave and his car won't start. And so then, so it was about 18 months. I think we had around 40 hours of footage. And then, right, which was not a ton.
Yeah, not a lot. Yeah, comparatively.
Yeah, comparatively for a documentary. But yeah, I think it was I'll have to check with my post producer, but I believe it was around 40 hours. And then, yeah, the editing process totally changed. We had gone in, we did not know how much of the comedic banter between Adam and I would be in the film. Well, actually, we didn't contemplate it being in the film. It wasn't something that we were cutting for the first 3 or 4 months. We were cutting Adam's story, right? We were cutting the story of a guy who sacrificed his career for a set of truly held beliefs. Like that was our narrative. And then, the editor and one of my producers kept pointing out that there were all these moments where we were exchanging some kind of funny banter. And my first reaction was, A, I'm not that funny, which Adam will tell you too. But like, I don't know how much these moments are valuable. Like I didn't think of them as valuable because it, to me, was just a part of our relationship building. And it just became, the evolution of our friendship. So I was like, I don't know how that's germane to the film. That was my first reaction. And then, as we kept cutting, it just clearly became what the film was about as much as anything else, right? And the need for civil discourse, right? And the idea that you can, form a really good and strong friendship with someone whose political views you oppose, and show the evolution of a friendship happening across the span of these really important, and serious things that Adam was going through, became as much part of the story, as I said, as anything else. So that was the editorial process. And it was really fun and really interesting to find the film became that as we cut it.
Gentlemen, my last question here for you is, with this new administration that's coming in, we're seeing that certain pieces of media are maybe being more hushed than others, maybe some that are a bit critical of the administration. And I'm curious for both of you, have you experienced pushback to this movie in ways that would make it so that people struggle to see it? Like, was clinching the film forum like a victory for you guys in that context?
Well, the Film Forum, I think, saw it at TIFF. So it was before the election that they decided to bring on the film. It certainly has a different context now. I'll let Adam speak to that in terms of what he thinks going forward in terms of like the kind of political wins as it pertains to our film. But certainly it has a very different feel now.
Yeah, I think, look, I think right now, between now and I guess January 1st, everybody, and this happens every election year, feels just like wiped out. They feel beat down. They feel exhausted, and particularly this year. And, but I think come January, because I've lived this, by the way, multiple times, that fire picks up again. Once we get into the reality of Donald Trump as president, people aren't going to be scared. They're not going to be walking around licking their wounds. It won't be as hysteric opposition as it was like 2017 to 2020, but there'll be some opposition and some people standing up against him. And I think this film, frankly, probably around that time frame is going to gain in importance because, again, one of the things that's the most concerning to me is we don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And I think this film shows that. And so anybody that would be kind of scared of touching a political documentary, good. Okay, this isn't a political documentary. This is a people documentary. It's a human interaction thing, and I think it's especially important now. So I don't know in terms of is there going to be more pushback? I don't know. I haven't felt any, but I think just for the sake of humanity and us getting along and understanding each other, it's the most important thing out there.
Steve, is there a theatrical rollout in hopes for this movie beyond the film forum release?
Well, we're hoping it catches fire out of the film forum. That happens, sometimes when people find the film. So we're hoping that happens. And then I think as we gain momentum, we'll have a good streaming, rollout as well. So there'll be that kind of second wave, which gives people the opportunity to see the film. Like one of the things we notice, which I'm really hopeful about, is because the film is funny and unexpected and surprising in that way, it's a great collective experience. Like in the film festival world, you actually get to see hundreds of people in a room, which doesn't happen that often, certainly in comedy, or most movies today are going straight to streamers unless they're huge theatrical events. And I miss it. Like Adam and I talked about how much we miss being in a room with 300 people who are just laughing. And now it's a political subject, but the laughs are just the laughs. The laughs don't have a political persuasion, right? They're just things that happen that make you laugh because they're surprising or they're unexpected or they're ironic. And you come out of there with a feeling like, you had a shared experience. And so I think that'll be important to see, and how the run goes. And I think it should go pretty well because of it. At least I'm hopeful that it does.
Gentlemen, your work on this film is really incredible. Adam, it goes without saying that everything that you have said and done in the wake of this political craziness is very admirable. So thank you so much for that. And Steve, thank you for being the one to capture it and to present it in this way. It's a great film, and I think everybody needs to have it on their radar and take a look for it. Thank you both so much for joining us.
You bet. Great being with you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Radar and take a look for it. Thank you both so much for joining us.
You bet. Great being with you.
Yeah, thanks so much.